Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Ed Bell, Chair of the Audit Committee. Good morning and welcome to this remote meeting taking place on the 25th of September 2020. It's been recorded live to the Council website and will be available to be viewed for a minimum of 6 months. Please be aware that any footage from this meeting can be used in subsequent media broadcasts. I would like to give a warm welcome to members, officers and any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed of the meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. All participants must mute their microphones. To speak, use the chat functions on the right-hand side, type RTS, request to speak. Remember, everyone in the meeting can see the messages in the chat function. When invited to speak by the chair, remember to unmute your microphone. Once invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name, position, unless you've already done this previously. If you have any issues with connectivity, try switching off your video and use the telephone function. If connectivity issues continue, you may have to leave the meeting and rejoin to get a better signal. If the chair's connection is lost, the vice chair will take over until my connection is restored. Okay, let's go into the meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Can I ask Ian Croft if there are any apologies received, please?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Carr, Clark and Shuttleworth. Thank you.
Item 2, does any member have any declarations to make about anything on the agenda? No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of June. These begin on page 5 of our papers. Can I ask if anybody has any questions or comments in relation to the minutes provided and to put RTS in the chat function? Can I ask for a mover and seconder for the minutes, please?
Chair, I put RTS in, may I?
Oh, sorry, I'm looking for that somewhere. Sorry, Clive. Clive?
Owen.
Oh, yeah, I know. Sorry, yeah. Could you ask your question on?
Yeah, it's Councillor Owen Temple from Concert North. Chair, thank you. I asked a question at the last meeting about the council tax collection rates, was shown to be tracking at 0.7% below last year, and the comment was made that it could worsen with this having a potential impact of between £4 and £6 million to the council. I wondered if we had any update on those figures, please.
Have you got any information on that, Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's Paul Darby, the Head of Finance, the Deputy Section 151 Officer for the Council. Thank you for the question, Councillor Temple. The current in-year recovery rate is, as at the end of last week, 53.52%. Sorry, 51.6%, which compares with the position at the same point last year of 53.52%. So it's around about sort of just under 2 percentage points below the in-year collection rate we were achieving at this time last year. So as John outlined at the previous meeting, as expected, that sort of there has been a widening of the gap as we've sort of got deeper into the pandemic. So the initial forecasts of sort of potentially an in-year sort of deficit position on the collection fund is materialising, and that's what we've been including in our MHCLG returns. Clearly, whether that council tax is subsequently recovered into next financial year, that'll be something we'll need to take a view on in terms of our provision for bad and doubtful debts when we come to complete the collection fund at the end of this year. And that position is reflected in the collection fund forecast we took through to Cabinet in September, and what we'll take through to Cabinet in October again in terms of an updated position.
Have you any other questions to ask, Owen?
That was it. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the answer.
Thank you. Are there anybody else? Thank you. Have we got a mover and a seconder for the minutes, please?
Move them, Chair.
Thank you.
Kellers.
Bill Kellers, thank you. Is a seconder?
Yeah.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you. Can we move on to item 4, which is the annual health, safety and performance report. And is Kevin here? Are you taking this one, Kevin?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, certainly. I'll just take you through that.
Can you just introduce yourself, Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin Lough, Durham County Council Occupational Health and Safety Manager. I'd just like to take you through the annual health and safety and wellbeing report. I'll just take you through some of the key points from the report. It is quite a lengthy report, so I'll just pick out the key points. So this is obviously covering 2019-20. The council achieved the Better Health at Work Gold Award status, which is a really positive thing for the council to achieve. And we're currently working towards the continuing excellence status, and this gives us the organisational commitment to employee health and wellbeing. To achieve the award, we have to collate quite a lot of information and evidence in terms of as an employer what we have to do. So that's a positive thing, and that's a national award which we've achieved, and we're continuing to work on that. Obviously, through the current situation, employee health and wellbeing is paramount, and we're doing an awful lot of additional things in addition to the requirements of the award to ensure our employees maintain safety in an extremely challenging landscape at the moment, and particularly around health, well-being and mental health as well. So we're committed to that, and we're working on that. We undertook some employee engagement surveys throughout the period as well. That gives us, we had a really high level of response, our highest level of response, which shows our employees are really willing to engage with us, and we take a lot of information and intelligence from those activities to improve workplaces and work activities and make things better and safer for our employees. In terms of audits and inspections, positive to report, about 60% of our audit and inspections remain proactive. We did in excess of 500 risk-based proactive audits and inspections last year across a range of council activities on a risk basis as well. So we do target the foreseeably high risk activities across the council. Accidents and incident statistics remain pretty static in terms of the overall numbers, with an increase of 6.2%, which equated to about 1,000 overall. About 95% of all of our reported accidents, they remain as minor injury or no injuries, which is again positive to report. And with the RID or reportable accidents only accounting for about just over 2%. So again, a low number of RID or particularly specified injuries, which is the more serious types, with only 5 reported in the whole of that year. So that's 5 too many, but that is a relatively low number for the size of the organisation and what we do. Occupational health, which is it plays a pivotal role, certainly at present this year, in terms of COVID, in terms of supporting employees, and they are running and administering the testing process for us. They achieved a national accreditation by the Faculty of Occupational Medicine. So that was positive. There's not many providers in the UK have that. And again, they facilitate the employee assistance programme. And in the report, there's some quite detailed stats on how many people access the employee assistance programme. for what reason, and the broad range of support that programme gives our employees. So some quite detailed information in the report. Again, happy to take any questions on that. We had 16 fire-related incidents across the year, no injuries, and we undertook over 100 internal fire safety audits, and are working closely with the County Durham and Darton Fire Rescue Service as we do. We've got a really positive working relationship, and we work very closely with them in terms of fire safety. No enforcement action throughout the year, which was positive from the Health and Safety Executive or Fire and Rescue Service. We received some really positive feedback from the Health and Safety Executive after we were put under some scrutiny as part of a national campaign to scrutinise local authorities' arrangements for asbestos management, particularly within school settings. HSE inspectors undertook a number of visits and gave us a really positive some feedback in terms of our overall management arrangements, which was great in terms of the outcome. Obviously, we've put in there about health and safety and occupational health services playing a pivotal role, at the start of the COVID pandemic, and that continues to be the case. As you can imagine, an awful lot of working with internal services like public health, HR, and external partners as well, to ensure that we've got all the procedures and guidance and governance in place to, that's critical to our employee health and well-being, but also any services, anyone who's affected by our services, members of the public coming into our buildings, etc. So we have done an awful lot of work on that. We're improving the health and safety offer by introducing a new accident reporting system, which is coming very shortly, and also an enhanced audit and inspection system, so that will increase efficiency and improve our offer as a health and safety service. So those are the key headlines, Chair, from the report. Just happy to take any questions on that.
Have any members got any questions of Kevin's report?
Yes, Chair, Councillor Bill Kelly. On page 24 of the report, chart 2, EAP activity. I'd like a comment, please. Top 5 reasons for cause. Mental health, 303. The next one is relationship, 76. 303 is a lot. Then we go up further at the bottom of the table. 99.1% of calls came from employees. But I think worryingly, 75.1% were calls from females. Would you like to comment, please?
Have you got any information on that, Kevin, or would you like to?
The statistics and what we know from working with our employee systems provider is that this is a national picture, particularly around the gender split. Females, statistically, in all the research and evidence shows that females are more likely to seek help and call and use something like the employee assistance programme. What we have done is targeted around the gender split in particular, and we have targeted certain parts of the organisation where there's a predominantly male aspect of the workforce, and we're trying to reach out to obviously the male element of the workforce, and obviously from a workforce perspective we've got more females than males work within the council, we know that. So that figure's always going to be laid that way, but we are targeting particularly the male part of the workforce, where we know through campaigns nationally that males are less likely to engage with and seek help and support and talk about mental health issues. There's a lot of stigma around that, so we've worked very closely with public health in delivering things like on-site awareness sessions, workshops, presentations where there is more predominantly male element of the workforce. To give some examples, some of our depots, some refuse and recycling, some of the workshops out there. So those have been really well received, but that's something we would have to continue and do more of. I don't know whether you've got any more specific queries on that, Councillor Keller.
I don't have any more questions, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Anybody else have any questions? I can't see any. Okay, can we accept that report, note the report as per the recommendations from Kevin? Great. Yeah, thank you. Item 5 on the agenda, you taking this one again, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is the Q1 report. So again, I'll just highlight the key areas within this report. So Q1, obviously, we were into the period where the COVID implications really impacted on the council. Health and safety and occupational health services, as I mentioned before, providing really key support for the organisation, work collaboratively with a range of internal and external providers. We've led on some implement some significant interventions during that time, particularly for Occ Health. We've started the employee testing program process, where all of our employees go through our internal occupational health service and are triaged by that service before going for tests where appropriate through the County Durham and Darlington Foundation Trust. So just to give you an idea of numbers, we've had about 600 calls to date for employees requesting or have symptoms of COVID. About 400 of which have been tested through the County Durham and Darlington Foundation Trust. We've got a really slick, streamlined process in place for that. Even through the demands, for example, last week we're still getting results back under 72 hours, and this week under 48 hours. So we've got a really good relationship, and we're getting those results back to our employees, which is really important. And that system's worked really well since that was established in Q1. We've set up our PPE distribution cell at Chiltern, where members of my team were involved in the initial setup in that in Q1. That also provides personal protective equipment not only to council employees but also to health and social care services external to the council right across County Durham and Darlington. That was a huge ask to set that up, but nevertheless it was set up, and that's been functioning really well, and it's obviously developed and evolved since Q1, but that remains a hugely important and successful element of getting personal protective equipment out to key essential workers and obviously people dealing with vulnerable people in our communities. Home working is another thing that we've done a lot of work on in Q1, a lot of guidance support, worked fantastically well with ICT colleagues and other people within resources, HR in terms of developing temporary policies to support employees. On a practical level, we deliver equipment from ICT to office furniture to people's homes where that's required, and also we've got a suite of additional mental health and wellbeing support mechanisms in place. Employee engagement, and we've done some workshops with public health. Really, we accept that it's challenging times for people changing their working practices, working from home, and we're trying to work through the outcomes and the nuances of that in terms of mental health and keeping people keeping their well-being up as much as we can. We've done, as you would imagine, a lot of work around risk assessments following the government and PHE guidance. We've done lots of employee briefings during this period around COVID, and an awful lot working with corporate property and land colleagues in terms of making sure our buildings are COVID secure. As you know, the council has an awful lot of buildings in terms of its property stock, and that was a big ask to do that. We've got around all of our buildings the COVID secure where they need to be, and we're also checking those arrangements remain in place as part of that sort of follow-up audit and assurance work activity. Again, mental health, employee health and wellbeing is a key factor, and some of the work that we've done from employee focus groups has been fed back in to some additional interventions that's been arranged for employees. Schools, health and safety advice, again in Q1 hugely challenging in terms of those initial key workers who were sending the children to schools, keeping the schools up and running during that period, and subsequently preparing for more broader pupil numbers to be accepted into schools. Again, we've provided PPE to schools, personal protective equipment to schools and academies through the PPE cell, and continue to provide essential PPE for schools to operate and keep open. On a broader, outside of COVID, we had 2 fire-related incidents in Q1, which are detailed in the report. From a water safety perspective, because there's some business as usual stuff in the report as well. So we were preparing for going into the summer months, and one of the things that, you know, the fantastic work that we've done previously around open water safety is some of our campaigns, which we knew. For example, we usually deliver face-to-face education sessions within schools across County Durham. We knew we couldn't do that this year because of the restrictions in place. So we developed alternative ways to deliver the water safety campaign, and put things in place in Q1, such as new campaign videos, media interviews, social media messaging, and erecting posters across some of our prominent open water locations across the county. So again, we haven't stopped doing that. We've just done that in an alternative way. From an accident statistic point of view, as you can imagine, the accident statistics dropped dramatically. And again, I think that was a reflective of the arrangements and the strict lockdown that was in place during Q1, and the restriction on lots of our work activities. So again, there's information on the accident statistics on there, but again, really low in Q1, and we would expect that to pick up again in Q2, as a lot of the work activities that we do were kind of reinstated, and we got some work activities restarted. So I think that's, again, Chair, that's the key headlines from the Q1 report.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Has any members going to have any questions? No. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, I'd like to put a request to speak. It's Clive Robinson.
Sorry, Clive. I'm just trying to find you. Okay, Clive, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Clive Robinson, independent member of the Audit Committee. Thanks very much for all of that detail and for the excellent work being done, Kevin. Just a question about, say, in recent days, where the local authority supported the request across the region to enforce additional lockdown measures that the government have then implemented. Is there anything that the authority would need to do to support a lifting of those measures that isn't already part of what you're reporting on?
I would err on the side of of course our Director of Public Health and senior officers are involved in those discussions, so which I'm unfortunately not part of. But what I do know is that those arrangements and the current restrictions are reviewed on a regular basis. Obviously, we've got feedback from constituents and councillors and lots of other people in terms of the appropriateness of some of the measures, and I think there's lots of discussions going on with central government and senior government ministers about the North East and the LA7 arrangements in terms of that and the appropriateness. So I couldn't give a categorical answer on that, but what I do know is our Director of Public Health and obviously members of our corporate management team are in regular discussions with senior government officials about the lockdown restrictions, and literally on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, based on the intelligence and transmission and infection data within the county and of course across the North East, in terms of the appropriateness and whether things are tightened up or not. And those discussions are ongoing. But I can certainly get some more detailed feedback on that if you wish from public health colleagues.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Are you happy with that, Clive?
Yeah, no, it's obviously with all of these things that we just want to make sure that we know if there is an absolute ask of the team to have to support. And as I say, they're doing excellent work, so I just want to make sure they've got everything they need to do that. But thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Clive, for the question. John, can I go to John Robinson? John?
Yeah, sorry, I meant to put my hand up on the proper way. Just for Clive Robinson, as members, we get a link that takes us to the up-to-date figures and the up-to-date information and hotspot. Perhaps that could be shared with Clive so that he can see exactly the same figures as us, because Clive, it gives you a rolling daily figure, exactly what's going on in the area, in the county, and it is extremely useful. So perhaps if that could be shared with Clive, that would help answer his question.
Thanks very much, Councillor Robinson. That would be great.
Okay, Clive, thanks. I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't really emphasise our two independent members, Ian Rudd and Clive Robinson, for their work and input into this committee. So a little plug for you, Clive and Ian, so thanks very much. Okay, no more questions on that. Can we accept that report? Thank you. Can I go to item 6, which is the final outrun for the general fund and collection fund? And I think Paul Darby is going to take us through this. Thank you, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Again, what you've got with the agenda pack is a copy of the report that was taken through to the County Council's Cabinet back in July in terms of the outturn position. It's a very detailed report, covers the revenue and capital outturn for last year across both the general fund, the collection fund as well, and also sets out the outturn position for our schools and the dedicated schools grant spend, and plus details of our reserves and balances at the end of March 2020. The figures and the content of this report are factored into the 2019-20 statement of accounts that we'll consider later on the agenda, and the figures have been subject to audit by external audit. We've got the external auditor's opinion on the accounts to consider later on the agenda. I would, however, want to bring to members' attention a few key issues highlighted in the report, and I appreciate it's a very detailed report. And what I would add, Chair, is that the report's supplemented by even more detailed reports that go to the individual thematic scrutiny overview and scrutiny committees that look at the individual service areas in a little bit more detail. But what you'll see from the papers, there was a net overspend last year of just under 5.1 million against the service group and cash limit budgets, with overspending occurring in the children and young people services service grouping and in the former regeneration and local services service grouping. And those overspends were in excess of underspends in the other service groupings. The report contains a detailed overview of the reasons for the cash limit over and underspendings for each service grouping in paragraphs 31 to 82. Corporately, however, there was an overachievement of core grants and an underspend on other core corporate budgets of just under sort of 5.1 million. And the reasons for that are detailed in paragraph 26 to the report. When you take the corporate position and the service group and cash limit position together, the net overall position for the council was a net overspend for the year of £27,000 against the budgets that were agreed by council. Members will see at paragraphs 44 to 63 an analysis of the dedicated schools grant outturn, which includes the position for our maintained schools and an outturn expenditure against the high needs and the early years dedicated schools grant blocks also. The table of paragraph 60 shows the DSG reserve position we are carrying forward at the 31st of March, and members will see we're carrying a deficit in terms of the high needs block, and that position on the high needs spending is something that Cabinet have received a number of reports over recent years and is in fact a sort of a national position. Taking the outturn into account, the total, excluding schools, the general fund earmarked reserves and cash limit reserves position at the 31st of March are around about £5.5 million lower than the position at the 31st of March 2019. The total now being 234.2 million. However, and I would bring members' attention to the fact that the position is masked somewhat by the receipt of the first tranche of the COVID-19 support grant we received on the 27th of March, just before the year end, and which has been expended in the current year, so was carried over as an earmark reserve in the position. If it were not for the receipt of that funding, the outturn position in terms of our earmark reserves would have been around £17.5 million less than what is included in the statement of accounts, and would have been at 216.7 million. In terms of the capital programme, the outturn showed that capital expenditure for the year was just over 110.1 million, which was just under £7.5 million below the revised budgets, and the details of the capital outturn are set out in paragraph 85 to 94. The underspend against the revised capital programme has been reflected in slippage into the current year's capital programme, and that's been reported through to Cabinet in September. Finally, Chair, in respect of the collection fund, the outturn position was a surplus on both the council tax and the business rates collection funds. There was a small surplus of £220,000 on the council tax side, of which the county council's share is £184,000, and a larger surplus on the business rate side of £9.9 million, of which our share is £4.9 million. The outturn position on the council tax collection fund is detailed in paragraphs 95 to 105, whereas the business rate collection fund outturn is explained in paragraphs 96 to 120, Chair. Appreciate there's a lot of information in the report, and lots of that information including the statement of accounts, but I'm happy to take any queries or questions members might have on the report, which is largely for information and for members' awareness. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Owen, I believe you've got a question you'd like to ask.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's about paragraphs 52 to 54 of the report, which is about the school's position. And I realise that this will to some extent be overlapping with Children and Young People's Scrutiny Committee. So I want to take your advice on how we might look at it, as it were, in the long run. But it strikes me as quite disturbing that we have a position where we have the same number of schools in deficit as the previous year, that's 21 schools, but the amount of deficit on that number of schools has risen by over £1.5 million. So it's quite a narrow band, but it's obviously an issue, and particularly in paragraph 54, it says that there are 4 schools with long-standing difficulties where we've been supporting them, and I think many of us on this committee know which those schools are. But I wondered if Paul could tell us, of those 4 schools with the long-standing difficulties and the additional support and oversight, have their deficits gone down or have they continued to rise? So that's paragraph 54. I'm sorry, it's quite a precise question. If you don't have the answer, I understand that. But
yeah. Thank you for the question, Councillor Temple. I think I'll have to defer back to the absolute detail. I do understand that at least in 2 of the schools that the deficit did increase across the year. One of them definitely decreased. The other one broadly stopped the same. I mean, I do have the details of which schools they particularly relate to, and you'll be aware that we've taken reports through Cabinet to bring to a conclusion at least 2 of those schools through academisation options with 2 of those schools, and I would expect that those deficits will be resolved in the course of this financial year, and will be the 2 of the more long-standing ones will be remain at the end of this financial year, and we're still working with those schools.
Chair, would it be possible to have a little more information then on that area for the committee? You're quite right, we know quite a lot of what's going on, but I think it's important that we keep tabs on what is a risk to the council as a whole. Thank you.
I think we'd like a bit of meat on the bone, please, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, Chair, if I may, there was a report we took through Cabinet in September that members might be interested in reviewing on the school's budget setting for 2021, and in there's some details on the schools in deficit and the plans in terms of some of those deficits being written off in year as 2 of the schools definitely convert or a plan to convert in the coming months.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. Owen, can we take that? That we'll get that information, and hopefully it'll give us some kind of a wider aspect of how things are going.
Thank you very much, Chair. That's very good. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Paul. Anybody else got any questions on Paul's report? No, thank you. Can we note that position? Okay, can we go on item? So, Ian, did you have a question?
Yes, sorry.
Ian Rudd.
Yes, it's Ian Rudd, co-opting member. I think it may be my lack of familiarity with the local authority accounting, but I was a bit unsure about the significance of the cash limits and the cash limits reserves as to whether these were statutory requirements or something that's only done by Durham. So maybe Paul perhaps could give me some detail about that, not necessarily in this meeting, but I didn't really understand the significance of that. And certainly the term appears quite frequently throughout this report and also some of the accounts as well.
Thank you. I'm happy to send you some more information outside the meeting, but very briefly, cash limit reserve is something that's not unique to Durham, but it's not a statutory requirement. What effectively it is that it encourages individual service groupings to manage their budgets over more than 1 year, and effectively any underspending that is generated within an individual service is retained by them and held in an earmarked reserve for their deployment in future years. Could be for investor save or for whatever sort of to meet one-off costs that sort of occur that are unbudgeted. It's to promote sort of better, more medium-term financial planning and effectively avoids what used to be when I was a trainee accountant back in the day, sort of mad March spending, as sort of people were sort of approaching the end of the financial year and sort of had underspends in their budget and would fill stationery cupboards up and sort of make sure that they spent their budget for fear that nasty strategic finance people like me would come along the next year and say, well, you didn't spend that, therefore you don't need it, therefore I'll take it off you. So it's to promote services to be more self-sufficient and manage within their resource envelope. So effectively the cash limit that's their budget. They need to manage their pressures and their spending within that. They can carry forward underspends. They can offset overspends in the year from that. But fundamentally, as we come to set the budget in the following year, there is a requirement for them to address any base budget issues on a more permanent basis. Hopefully that gives a little bit of an explanation. I can provide more information if that wasn't sufficient.
No, that's very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for the question. Thanks, Paul. Do we accept and note the report per the recommendations? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Can we move on to item 7, which is the Treasury Management Outrun? And again, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. This report, Chair, meets the requirements of the Prudential Code and sets out the outturn position for our Treasury management activities for last year. The report covers both our Treasury position at the 31st of March, our borrowing activity with comparisons against an investment activity against the previous year, and sets out the outturn position against the Treasury management and prudential indicators that we agree on an annual basis. I would draw members' attention to a number of key issues and facts and figures in the report. Members will see at the 31st of March 2020, the Council held £359 million in borrowing and £232 million of external investments. The summary position is shown at paragraph 13. Last year, we undertook new borrowing of £40 million from the PWB at rates of between 1.75% and 2.23%. We also took out the first tranche of our forward borrowing agreement with Phoenix Life, and we took out a loan of £20 million at 2.73% in year. Our overall borrowing activity and details of our debt outstanding at the end of the year is set out at paragraph 15 to 22 of the report. In terms of investments, Chair, the report shows that we continue to fully comply with the CIPFA code and all government guidance. Investment activity is set out at paragraphs 23 to 25 of the report. Finally, Chair, the report sets out the outturn position against our treasury management indicators, showing our interest rate exposure and the structure of our borrowing, plus the outturn position in terms of the range of prudential indicators aligned to the prudential code. And as members will see, the Council can demonstrate compliance with all of the prudential indicators, and we sit comfortably within the operational boundary in terms of our external borrowing exposure, Chair. So happy to take any questions. I appreciate it's quite a technical report, but the report's for information and assurance from the committee, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any members got any questions or observations? Okay. Can we accept that report? Ian, before we move on, you've got a little question you want to ask?
Right, yeah, just briefly, I was looking at the table on paragraph 13, which suggests that you're receiving 1.05% return on investments, but paying out 3.42% on the debt. Now, on the face of it, that well, that's a 2.5% difference between the two. I appreciate that the amount of investments that or amount of money you've got available to invest varies according to the year, but presumably you do your best to minimise the difference between the investment cost and the cost of borrowing, or the investment return and the cost of borrowing. Is it possible to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and the balance between those is something that we look at on a daily basis in terms of our treasury management position. What I would note is that, on the face of it, you might think, well, shouldn't we just pay off a load of those loans using and have less investments, and sort of we would have a budget positive position? It's not as simple as that, because what we face if we look to sort of repay loans is premium early redemption charges, and because the premiums are applied to redeem loans early are based on the difference between the interest rate on the loan you're looking to repay and what you could borrow at the current point in time. And obviously the interest rates at this point in time are lower than that. So effectively the PVLB apply a premium to repay that, because every authority would then just repay higher interest rate loans at a lower interest. So it's quite punitive, and effectively means that you can't sort of repay them and do that sort of thing. But it is something that give the member a sort of assurance that it is something we look at on a regular basis and try to take opportunities where we can.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Chair,
Sorry, yeah.
Just following on from that, on para 24 on page 98, investment, other local authorities. Which local authorities can we afford to invest in?
I would have to defer to Beverly, who will know the details of which local authorities those investments are with. And if obviously she doesn't know off the top of her head, I'd have to sort of get you the information, more detailed information outside of the meeting, Councillor Kellett.
That's fine, Chair.
Thanks. I'm Beverly White. I'm a finance manager at Durham County Council. I don't know the exact local authorities, but I do know that local authorities approach us through brokers when they're short of cash, and we get better rates of interest from lending them money short term. But I can find out the exact local authorities if you need to know. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Beverly. Are you all right with that, Bill?
Yeah, as long as I find out, Chair, that's great.
Okay, thanks very much. Can we go on? Are we all agreed to note that report? Can we go on to item 8, please? Just a minute.
Yeah, that's our report, Chair.
Mark, you taking this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's Mark Kirkham. I'm a partner with Mazan. We are the Council's external auditors. Item 8 in the agenda papers is our audit completion report, and that's the report of our audit findings that we share with the Audit Committee before we proceed to close the audit and give an opinion on the accounts and issue a value for money conclusion. What sets out our intended audit report. At the time we drafted the report, there were, as you'll be able to see from the executive summary, some outstanding procedures. I'll hand over to James in a moment, who will be able to update you and just give you assurance that we've completed many of those outstanding tests as we proceed to close the audit. But I just wanted to give members some information about how we've proceeded to conclude our audit testing, working alongside officers in the highly unusual set of circumstances in which we haven't been allowed on the premises for the reason that you're all aware of. So remote working threw up a new set of challenges for us and your finance team this year. And I just wanted to make sure that members of the Audit Committee were aware of how well your finance team did in supporting the audit and responding to the audit queries. We were unable to relax or dilute the work that we did in connection with our audit of the account, so there's been no relaxation of auditing standards. So we carried out the usual rigorous and deep approach to test the income and expenditure and the balance sheet to make sure that we got sufficient appropriate evidence. So I just wanted to put on record how well your team responded to that. There was a need for flexibility on each side, but we are managing to proceed and conclude our procedures. So as I said, I'll ask James to update the committee on the status of our work, but also to explain what we found in connection with the significant risks. So those were the more sensitive parts of financial statements that we decided we needed to carry out additional procedures on, in which we communicated to the Audit Committee in our audit strategy memorandum earlier in the year. So James, could you step in, please?
Yeah, thank you. It's James Collins, Senior Manager at Mazar. So as Mark says, on page 5 of the completion report, we set out some areas that at the time of drafting the report were outstanding. So if I give you an update on where we are currently with that work. So the first one was journals testing. We concluded that work. We identified a weakness in arrangements in the sense that we weren't provided with evidence of an authorization of a journal, but we got alternative assurance from the individuals involved in that journal. And I think part of the problem was created by the COVID and not being able to access records which are held at County Hall. So we concluded on that piece of work, which means we can also conclude on the management override risk, which I'll come on to in a second. The investments work, unfortunately, we are still waiting for direct confirmation for one of the council's investments. And that, unfortunately, we can't conclude and issue the opinion until we receive that. And hopefully members can appreciate the reasons for that, in particular the importance of auditor scepticism. So whilst the council have provided evidence that this investment is in place, it is important for us as auditors to get that external assurance from the third party. The debtors testing is also complete, which means we can conclude on our revenue recognition risk. Again, I'll come on to that. Cash and bank is finished with no further matters to report, as is our IT work as well, with no further matters to report. I suppose the key message there is that the work is complete bar the investment letter. We're not expecting any further changes to occur unless something happens externally to the council, which we're not aware of at this moment. So just to take you through some other areas, some key parts of the report. On page 6, we set out the materiality levels that the audit was completed to, including the triviality level on which we will report any matters or any issues identified above that level. So in terms of the significant risks, the first risk which we addressed was management override risk, and this is a risk that is standard across all audits and recognises that management are in a position, if they were to choose, to override controls that otherwise are operating effectively. We've completed all the audit procedures in that area, and we have no further matters to report. We've got the assurance that we were required. Revenue recognition. Revenue recognition recognises that there is a risk around when income is recorded. We rebutted the revenue recognition risk around grant income, but not for non-grant income. And with the completion of the work on debtors, we're able to conclude on that work. And again, we've got no further matters to report. Our work on property, plant and equipment is also complete, and no further matters to report, as is our work on the pensions, significant risk. We also had a couple of areas of management judgment. So these are areas where that we don't treat them as significant risk, but we recognise that there is an enhanced risk. So we looked at unquoted equity investments. Again, we've got the assurance that we sought, and the debtor impairment as well. And the completion of the work on debtors gives us the assurance that we were looking for that. Section 2 of the report sets out some of the key areas that we looked at and some of the key areas of discussion with management. Members may remember last year there was an issue around pensions relating to some ongoing legal cases, which resulted in some significant changes to last year's accounts. Those issues are still around, but your actuary provided numbers which are materially accurate, and management are satisfied that they're materially accurate. We've reviewed those and discussed those with management, and are comfortable that there's no further adjustments required. If I take you on to the next section of the report, which details some of the internal control recommendations that we identified. So these are areas of work where these are control weaknesses that we've identified during other areas of our work. So we've got 2 relating to IT and user access. We've got 1 relating to members' declarations, and a further 1 to add to that, which we will include in a follow-up letter around journal. Section 4 details the findings of our work. So what we've got is unadjusted misstatements. So these are areas of errors or differences in interpretation which management have chosen not to adjust the accounts for. So there is 4 areas on there, detail. None of them individually material, and collectively they're not material as well. So we will ask that management include those in the letter of representation that they issue to us when we're ready to sign the opinion. We also include in there the adjusted misstatements, and there was 2, both of which were relating to classification. So 1 was around investments and the split between long-term and short-term, and another was around the classification of some internal admin charges. Section 5 of the report details the value for money conclusion work. We are proposing an unqualified value for money conclusion, and it's important to stress that the value for money conclusion looks at the arrangements in place for 1920 financial year, recognising that that the impact of COVID-19 really came in towards the end of the 1920 financial year. So whilst we have considered the impact of COVID-19, our expectation is that the impact will be associated with our 2021 value for money conclusion work. The report also includes appendix. So the first one is the management letter of representation, which we will ask management to sign when we're ready to sign the audit opinion. The second is the auditor report that we would intend to sign. And the third is associated with independence, obviously independence for your external auditor, and assurance that your external auditor is independent is important. And just to flag those that we reported in the audit strategy memorandum. So I'll pause there and happy to take any detailed questions on the report that you have.
Okay, thank you. Owen, did you have a question you want to ask?
I do, Chair. It was one that I'd flagged up before, and I think I heard James say this as well. So I'd like to pick up on the fact that, as I understand it, you're saying that you're awaiting direct confirmation from a financial institution for one of the council's investments, and you are still waiting for it, which presumably is some weeks later. I'm a bit concerned that we are placing investments with an institution which doesn't provide us with a paper trail. So can you tell us who it is and why this has happened?
Mm-hmm. So the institution is National Savings and Investments. So we originally made a request in April, and we've subsequent follow-up requests. We've contacted the bank as well, and I think they are experiencing issues associated with COVID-19. That's the explanation that we've been provided with, but it's difficult because we need that direct confirmation from the institution before we can issue that opinion. So whilst we have seen evidence, and whilst the council has got evidence of that investment, hopefully you can appreciate that we need that direct confirmation, and you don't need to look far in the news to see why auditors take a particular interest in getting the direct confirmation, certainly around investments, cash, borrowing, etc. So that's the reason why we can't. We're not in a position today to sign the opinion.
Chair, I hear the answer, but I actually, as I say, shocked that this could happen. You could send a carrier pigeon from National Savings to County Hall. And I'm not sure it's an explanation that it isn't actually an excuse, COVID, because I think later on in this report there may be some occasions where we know that COVID is. So I'm not blaming the council at all, who've obviously done everything they can. What can we do to make an institution that we collectively, as the population, own, behave in the way we'd expect and would excoriate any bank for not doing? What can we do about it?
I'm not sure there's a great deal. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a great deal that ourselves or the council can do. To be fair, we've as I say, we've followed up with letters. We've contacted them, have spoken to both ourselves and the council officers. Unfortunately, I think sometimes these things just get lost in a large organisation, and yeah, we will keep pressing from both sides, I think, to try and get a response.
Well, perhaps we'd better try the President tweet approach and let the world know that National Savings can't produce a certificate. Thank you, Chair. Not very satisfactory.
No. Thank you. Anybody else got any questions? Okay. In view of that, sorry.
It's Clyde Robinson again.
Sorry, Clyde. Yeah.
Just a quick one for James on the internal control recommendations on IT security and the use of shared accounts. I accept the point about there's a replacement for the SSID coming through next year, and alternative controls are in place. But on the first one around the use of shared privileges accounts on the network, we're saying that the process will be reviewed in the coming year. Can we get something more timely from management on that one in terms of when that would be completed to improve the security on that access?
Chair, if I may,
Paul.
I've got a meeting on Monday afternoon with our ICT colleagues and people from the payroll team and the like to sort of get that sort of detail about what can be done, what needs to be done, and when that can be done, with a view to that being done as soon as possible, so to address those concerns raised in the audit completion report. So I just give the committee assurance that sort of we are sort of acting on those recommendations, and I'm chairing a meeting on Monday afternoon to sort of get behind that and see what can be done to address the concerns that have been raised.
Thanks very much.
Anybody else? Okay, can I ask, in the light of the position update that we're at, are members happy to note the information contained in the report, including the summary of misstatements detailed in section 4 of the report and subject to the questions that have been asked? Are we all right with that? Thank you.
Chair, can I just add my thanks on behalf of John, Jeff and myself to the auditors, because I think, you know, whilst it was opened up around the unique set of circumstances that the officers have had to sort of deal with in terms of completing the accounts this year, it's been equally challenging, I guess, for our colleagues in Mazars in terms of concluding the audit. And, you know, whilst the deadlines have sort of slipped in terms of publication, the government sort of recognised that. I think it's sort of to everybody's credit that's been involved in the preparing of the accounts. Notwithstanding, there's one or two niggly issues like the NSI verification of that investment that's outstanding. I think it's, you know, it's testament to everybody who's been involved in the process that we're at this stage at this point of the year, and at a position, I guess, that not many authorities will be at or are at this point in time across the country, never mind in our region. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Paul. Thanks very much to the Mazar team. Thank you. Okay. Can we move on to item 9, which is the Audit Strategy Memorandum Pension Fund? And I think, Daniel, you're taking this, Daniel Ray?
Chair, I'll take that if it's all right, and Daniel can come in for the following item.
Okay, thanks.
Make members aware of the fact that we would normally have issued our audit strategy memorandum for the pension fund much earlier in the year. We did actually conclude it in the spring, but as a consequence of the pandemic, members will be aware of the additional layer of risk that applies to investment values. So we just wanted to make sure that we were absolutely bang on our risk mitigation work in connection with the level 3 investments that are present in the pension fund's investment portfolio. So that's why the audit plan, the audit strategy memorandum, wasn't presented to Audit Committee earlier in the year, and that's why it's here at the same time as our audit findings report. So an unusual set of circumstances. I won't spend any time going through the audit strategy memorandum because, as I say, we're about to go through the findings in connection with the headline messages in the plan, especially in connection with the significant risks. So that's our next agenda item, Chair, and if it's all right with you, we can move into that straight away. But of course, members might have some questions on the plan, so we should pause there.
Okay. Have any members got any questions on the plan before we go into the report itself? No? Okay, thank you. Can we go on to item 10? And Can I bring Daniel Ray in to present this report, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to introduce myself, I'm Daniel Ray. I'm an assistant manager at Mazar, and I am the audit manager on the pension fund side of things. So the report we have here is exactly the same as what James has just presented for the council. It's our completion report for the pension fund audit, setting out our intended report. So if we jump into section 1, it sets out, again, we've got some outstanding areas of work. There's not very many there. The first one is the EQCR review, and that's just where we've had a second partner. After Mark has reviewed the work, we've had a second partner reviewing the audit work just as an additional level of control, quality control. And that's just because of the size of the assets that the pension fund has. So he's done his review and he's raised some points that we need to look at, but it's all internal stuff. We might need to liaise with finance staff to address some of them, but hopefully we have all the information we need. Also, we received an annual report just a couple of weeks ago, and we just need to quickly check that to make sure any figures or disclosures in the annual report are consistent with the main financial statements, but that shouldn't be a big job at all. Section 1 also sets out our materiality that we used for the audit. We've used a benchmark of 1% of net assets, and it also has the triviality threshold, and again, that's the threshold above which we would report any errors that we found in the accounts. So if we move on to section 2 details the significant risks that we had for this audit. The first one is management override, and as James mentioned, this is just a standard risk that applies to all audits, just to reflect the fact that management in a position to override controls should they wish to do so. Again, we've completed all our work on this area as well, and we haven't had any issues to report. We've got the assurance that we need. The second significant risk on the pension fund is the valuation of unquoted investments or level 3 investments. And as Mark just mentioned, there's always a high level of scrutiny on these, just because of the fact that there is a lot of estimation involved. They aren't based on prices in quoted markets in the same way as other investments are. And this year we have had to do a bit extra work to reflect the fact that COVID caused a lot more uncertainty and volatility in the March markets than in typical years. But for the work we've done to date, we have concluded on it and we haven't found any issues, but that is also subject to those review points raised by the second partner. And if we find anything additional after we've cleared those points, we'll of course update the committee in the future. Section 2 again, the next bit just talks about some of the significant matters we've discussed with management. The main one being, as I've just mentioned, COVID-19 creating a lot of uncertainty in markets at the 31st of March. And as a result of that, we do have an emphasis of matter paragraph in our opinion. And all that means is it's just highlighting something that's already in the accounts for users to look at. It's not, as we've said in there, it doesn't modify or qualify our opinion in any way. It's just highlighting something unusual to draw people's attentions to. Then if we move on to section 3, again, this is the same in the council report. We've set out the internal control recommendations that we found in the year. We've got 2 on the pension fund, and those are 2 of the 3 that were on the council. Like, they're exactly the same. The only one that was on the council report that we don't have in here was the one related to the SSID system, and that's just because that's relating to social care, doesn't really impact the pension fund side of things. But the other 2, in terms of the resource link system and declarations of interest, they are still relevant to the pension fund, which is why we have them in there. We've also got a follow-up of previous recommendations that we raised in previous years. So the first one was where there was an issue where the pension fund risk register hadn't been reviewed by the pension fund committee for a while, but it's supposed to be annually. But since we raised this last year, it has been reviewed in both March 19 and March 20, so that issue's okay now. And then the other one is the IT deficiency, which I believe was the same as the council one. So we raised one last year and then we've found similar findings this year. On to section 4, the summary of misstatements, we've just got the one unadjusted misstatement. This misstatement just reflects the fact that, again, it's on these unquoted investments where It just reflects the difference between the value of the unquoted investments that are in the accounts and the value that we've recalculated during the audit based on information that we received from the fund managers. So again, due to the fact that these valuations are not based on quoted stock markets, there's always a degree of estimation and judgment involved. So two people carrying out the valuation of these investments are unlikely to ever reach the exact same figure. So we do tend to report a difference in this area every year in our audit completion report. And some of it will just be due to the fact that we've used a slightly different exchange rate for foreign currency investments, for example. But in the context of the total investments, the unquoted investments, the total of them is about 193 million. It is a relatively small difference, and it's certainly nowhere near material. And then other than that, we just had a few minor disclosure amendments that have been amended by the finance team. So then if we move on to the appendices, Appendix A, as was with the council report, this is just the letter of representation that we ask management to sign when we issue the opinion. Appendix B is our draft opinion that we are proposing to sign. And then Appendix C is a consistency report, and this just says that the pension fund financial statements within the pension fund's annual report are consistent with those that are included in the council's financial statements. And as with the council's report, we have Appendix D outlining our commitment to independence, which is important for us as external auditors, and it just confirms that we haven't identified any threats during the year. So I think that's everything. I'm happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Very comprehensive. Has any member or anybody got questions, please, for Daniel? Okay, thank you. I think subject to, again, section 4, can we note the information contained in this report? We agree with that? Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Daniel. Item 11 is the annual government statement for the year. And I think Dave Marshall is going to take this. Is that right, David?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name's Dave Marshall, Corporate Risk and Governance Manager for Durham County Council. This report is the annual governance statement. As members will recall, we have a draft annual governance statement which was approved in June, and then a final annual governance statement which is linked with the annual statement of accounts. So broadly speaking, the draft is nearly the final version, and there've only been one or two minor changes since then. So I thought really rather than go through the report again, I would just highlight the actual changes and point out a couple of issues with regard to ongoing issues around coronavirus. So really, if I could, there have been two main changes really to the body of the report. One is related to with colleagues in external audit identified, and together we discussed around the previous Ofsted inspections. There was a one in 2017 for special educational needs, and there was also one in 2019. They felt that the statement should perhaps better reflect progress on that, and they highlighted in paragraphs 83 and 84 on page 200. I'll come to them in a second. And then also we improved an action from that. And then we also did amendments, and as we did mention when we presented the draft report in June, SIPFA had recommended this year that we should update the final version with the ongoing position around coronavirus, any additional issues that should be brought to members' attention, particularly around our governance arrangements in the council and how we've been actually dealing with the pandemic, both as an organisation in the council, but then it's our broader responsibility to the community. And again, those issues are highlighted on specific pages. So I thought really the best approach would be to focus on the changes, and the first set are on page 200, which are paragraphs 83 and 84. Just basically page 83, paragraph 83 would provide there an update. There was an Ofsted report in 2017, as I mentioned, and the Care Quality Commission with regard to special educational needs under the Act, the Children and Families Act. There was actions required at the time, and we've then highlighted there that progress has been made in that area, and that's been monitored within the council. Similarly, in page 80, paragraph 84, the following paragraph there was an overall social services review by Ofsted in September 2019, and as you'll recall, members will recall, at the time the conclusion of that review was that we require improvement to be good. And again, since then, there's been a sort of plan put in place that, you know, actions have been taken and it's monitored, and progress against that is reported and reported into members and to the corporate management team as well. And again, improvements have been made within that. So the paragraphs 33 and 84 were changes from the previous version reflecting that work. And then on page 206 from that, emanating out of that, we actually put in additional action, and you'll see on page 206, which is item 6 in shading, we've put in a further action to be monitored in this year's governance statement, which is around monitoring the actions under the following the Ofsted reports. So that's the changes that we agreed with external audit. And then on pages 209 to 211, you'll find a number of minor changes there with regard, and again highlighted in grey shading, with regard to the SIP for governance arrangements. So I won't go through them individually, but they're there. But really, it's just we've got governance arrangements in place within the council, and that have helped us to deal with the pandemic, as I said, both organisationally and from our community responsibilities. And further things that we thought we just really highlight, we've highlighted between pages 209 and 211. As I said, I didn't want to go through them individually, but they're there for members to pick up on. Wasn't really anything I think extra I was going to say to that, and I was just going to open up to the floor for any questions from members on that.
Can I open to the floor if anybody has any questions on that report? No? Thanks very much, David. Very comprehensive, very hard times these, exceptional as well. Thanks, see. And now wait a minute, I've got another question. Oh, I've got a question coming in from Clive. Clive?
Thanks, Councillor Bell. Again, Clive Robinson, co-opted member. David, just a quick question. There are a number of actions that came forward from the improvements from 2018-19 into 1920, and quite a number are now being moved into 2021. I suppose the question is just, are we certain that they'll get closed off on a timely basis? And, you know, is there anything that we can do to make sure that they are completed?
Well, in terms of making sure that they're completed, we have targets on there. I mean, some of them, to be fair, some of them are actually ongoing, if you like, and we have a target date there to achieve them within the year, and some may still, I suppose, be carried forward in terms of that. In terms of monitoring, we monitor those on I'd say an ongoing basis, but in terms of, you know, each time that we have a committee, we sort of find out where we're at, and the corporate governance review that would take place for the 2021 year, again, will start probably around about January. So one of the first things, again, we'll be picking up there is, are we on target to achieve those timescales? And so they're determined by the services themselves, the heads of service, directors, corporate directors. But we would monitor the progress from January, and where we're at now, we know again in January the governance process starts. And one or two have been brought forward, I think, again because of as I say, the longer term issues. So you know, they may even be carried forward again into next year, but that doesn't necessarily mean progress isn't happening. It's just that it may be a long-term thing to actually implement it.
So maybe I would just be looking for something a bit more in terms of the update that just says what we've achieved by each meeting, then maybe something like that. But at the moment, just like I say, you know, in progress, carry forward to 2021 doesn't really tell me whether that's going to get completed, you know, by this point in the year, later in the year. Well,
we could. I mean, we could if if the committee wish, we could bring an update report after sort of 6 months. I think it's probably maybe to the audit committee in. I think there's one in February, isn't there? If I remember, I'm trying to remember the dates off the top of my head. If there's a meeting in February, we could bring an update at that stage, Councillor Clive, if that's If the committee, I don't.
Certainly, I'd appreciate an update. I don't, if the full committee would want it separately, then I'll leave that to the members. But yeah, I'd just like to be able to see that these are moving on.
Yeah, I think that's quite correct, Clive. That we just want to see that progress rather than, well, it's going to happen. It is going on. Just a more specific update date. Thanks, Dave. Yeah. Ian, I think you want to come in.
All right, yes, just to thank Dave for his report. I particularly like the way that he highlighted the changes from the previous draft, and maybe suggestion that some of the other reports that come to the committee could be treated in the same way, in the sense that when we receive a draft and then an updated version later on, perhaps the changes could be highlighted, so it makes it a bit easier to review and see what's changed.
Yeah, similar to Clive. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, taking that on board, Dave?
Yep.
Thanks very much. And nobody else want to speak on that? Okay, thank you. Can we take that report from Dave and as per the recommendations of the report, to approve the annual government statement for the year April 2019 to March 20. Okay, thank you. Item 12 is the statement of accounts for the year ended the 31st of March 2020. And can I ask Beverly White to come and give this report? Thanks, Beverly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in line with the Accounts and Audit Regulations, this is the second stage of the approval process for the Council's annual statement of accounts for 1920. So although the statutory deadline for this committee to approve the final set of accounts for this year isn't until the 30th of November, I am seeking committee approval today. The draft accounts have been subject to external audit by Mazar, as you've heard, since publishing on the 12th of June, and since the draft accounts were presented to this audit committee on the 29th of June, there have been a number of changes made to the statement as agreed with the auditors along the way. So these changes are reflected in the accounts included within this agenda item today. A number of minor amendments have been made to some of the notes in the accounts, most of which were made to comply with the requirements of the SIPFA code or to provide additional explanatory information. So the main adjustments to the accounts have been set out already in section 4 of the 2 audit completion reports for both the council and the pension fund. So I don't intend to go over those again today. And they were reported as by Mazar in agenda items 8 and 10 earlier. The minor amendments were made to 2 of the core statements, again as mentioned in the audit completion report and shown on page 123 of the pack. They were to the comprehensive income and expenditure statement and to the balance sheet. Now those changes were made just by transferring between different headings within those statements, and they did not alter the bottom line of the core statements. So none of the changes have impacted on the outturn position at the 31st of March 20 as reported to members on the 29th of June alongside the accounts. And as Paul has already referenced, at the 31st of March, general reserve balance remained at £23.95 million. Earmarked reserves totalled £217 million, and the pension fund assets were worth £2.8 billion. However, since last week, when the committee papers were distributed to members, there's been a small number of minor changes made to the statement, all to the supporting notes and none to the core statements, and it'll be that slightly amended version of the accounts I'll be asking the Chair and the Corporate Director of Resources to add their electronic signatures to, should the committee go ahead and approve the accounts today. Now those changes are in table on exit packages on page 332 of the pack. And the totals were correct, but the figures didn't cross-cast across, so that's been amended. There's another table shown on the collection fund whereby we had the incorrect year's council tax base shown, so that again has been adjusted, and that's on the top of page 366 in the pack. We've amended the text ever so slightly in one of the paragraphs in note 17 to remove duplication and make sure that the figure quoted in the paragraph matched the figure shown in the table, which had been revised since the original draft. So as the auditors have reported, they will be issuing an unqualified opinion on the accounts. I do recommend that members approve the final statement of accounts for 1920 today. This will allow us to publish the accounts on the council's website immediately after the audit is completed and the auditor has issued his audit certificate. As he's already commented, doesn't expect any changes apart from, well, subject to receiving the NS&I confirmation letter. So I do recommend that members approve these accounts today. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Beverly. Have any members got any questions from Beverly? I think, Owen, you've got a question that you'd like to ask?
Chair, it's really to support what Ian said in the last section about when we receive reports that are changed, it is much easier for us when the report is marked up, so that because to be honest, having ploughed through these accounts for an earlier meeting, I think it would be dishonest to me to suggest I was going to reread them all for this meeting, 250 pages of them. But if there was a way in which we highlighted those things that had changed, now I don't know if that's practical because this is such a huge report and Beverly can advise on that, but it does make it very difficult for us to move from draft to completed with confidence, and particularly in a world where we're actually being told there will be some further adjustments before they're published. So I think we have to get better at it, or really we're not providing all the assurance that we should be doing.
Well, can I invite you to come back at that, Bev? I think what Owen's after is just a little bit more reassurance between the time scales of each one. Thanks.
We could attempt to mark up on the final version of the accounts all of the changes, but you'd appreciate that there's a number of tables within those and they kind of copied and pasted from Excel spreadsheets into the Word document. Now, I think it'd be quite difficult to highlight exactly everything that changes. I mean, some of the changes will be material and they're as highlighted in the audit completion report in section 4. We can try and highlight the material changes possibly and leave any grammatical type of changes alone. Okay. When presenting the accounts, I try to kind of mention the main changes, and to be honest, there hasn't been that many material changes other than those in the audit completion report. But I do take your comments on board and we'll see what we can do for future reports.
Chair, thank you. I think that is a very helpful suggestion because, you know, Beverly is very diligent in drawing our attention, but I'm afraid I'm not fast enough on the iPad when it says page 322 and then 397 and we move around. I'm just not able to see it. Whereas I'm sure, just as Ian was suggesting, we like to get our heads around these things before we come to the meeting, because that's what we need to do. So if you could consider highlighting material changes for future years, I think that would be very, very helpful to us and give us a way of tackling this that at the moment I really don't have.
Yeah. Thanks, Bev. I think we've done our best, and I think just these small changes may help us for the future. Yeah. Thanks, Owen. Thanks for your observations on that. With that in mind, do we accept and note the report and accept the accounts, please? Okay, thanks very much. Can we move on to item 13, which is the Strategic Risk Management Progress Report? And I think, Dave, you're going to come in with this?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. again, Dave Marshall, Risk and Governance Manager for the Council. This is the 3 times a year we bring in a Strategic Risk Management Progress Report to committee. This one actually covers the period 1st of January to 31st of May. Normally this would have been presented at the July meeting, but which didn't take place this year. So sort of a bit of a time lag, if you like, on it. But we've tried to keep it up to date. So there may have been 1 or 2 adjustments around post 31st of May, just to make it more reflective. As you can imagine, in terms of the focus of the council, the key risk, the new key risk, and the main risk has been around COVID-19. Really, the other risks haven't changed at all. And I thought really it might be better to just explain that basically how we're tackling with risk management for the coronavirus and how it's affecting the council and again the community. So when the pandemic first came in, we set up a task. There was a number of task and finish groups set up across the council. One of them was risk management, and in a sense our job was to work with the other task and finish groups to identify risks early on. A lot of risks were identified early on, as you can imagine. They were some of them were things that we just didn't know anything about, so they were some were perhaps rationalised fairly quickly. And then since then we've had an arrangement where every fortnight we provide an update to corporate management team, because unlike our normal strategic risks that we're dealing with in this strategic risk report, which are long tail sort of things, and we're looking further into the future by the very name, strategic is a long-term thing. The COVID risks, it's a very, very fluid situation, very flexible. The risk will be up and it'll be down and be back up again because of the changing situation. So because of that, we have an arrangement where we monitor the risks. We have an update every week on them, and every fortnight we provide a report into CMT. John Hewitt takes that in directly himself and presents on that. We work with teams, and we're working as well on not just on the how to deal with the impact of the coronavirus, but also the risks around restoring and recovering, which potentially some of that, I suppose, has been put on hold with the local lockdown, but still working towards that in terms of restoration and recovery. There's groups there, and we're working with them and dealing with risks. And we have Kevin Roberts, as you know, is our risk officer. Kevin's actually involved with a lot of those groups directly, working hands-on in terms of identifying and helping to manage risks. So members can take that assurance that assurance is given constantly to corporate management team and exactly where we stand on a fortnightly basis. Didn't really want to sort of add too much more than that. And as I say, in terms of the report itself, the only key risk is on page 474, which is just identifying, which is an overarching risk about how we're actually dealing with COVID. But basically that just documents in brief what I've just said there, and what I said also around the AGS. We have governance arrangements in place for dealing with it, and in terms of risk management, we're identifying risks. It's very fluid. We monitor them on a continual basis, and we are reporting it into corporate management team every fortnight. But I'm happy to take any questions either on this report or anything else from the floor.
Thank you, Dave. Has anybody got any questions or comments or observations from Dave's report? Okay, thank you. I think Ian, you've got a question.
Oh, right.
Ian Rudd, sorry.
All right, thank you, it's Ian Rudd. Just to say that this report might be another candidate for, as Councillor Temple remarked about marking up changes from previous versions. Well, I wonder if this particular document might be a similar sort of candidate where any changes from the previous version could be highlighted, so it's easier to see what's changed.
The changes actually are highlighted, on pages. If we look at page, I'll just draw us down here to. So if we summarise, the key changes that have came in are on pages 472. And this time it's only really been around COVID, but normally, if you recall, we put in any risks that have been added, any risks that have been removed, and any risks where the score has changed. So we introduced them in that page, because the report itself, if you like, is a reflection of risk as at a certain point in time. The governance statement is slightly different. The governance was a draft version, then a final version, similar to what you're speaking to Bev on with the accounts. So you've got a draft, and really you don't want to read the whole document again. You just want to focus on the changes. The difference is that this is actually a statement, a report of the current status of strategic risks as at a certain point. The next report is a status at that point, any changes, any new risks, deleted risks or amended risks we put in on that section on page 472 in this case.
All right, yes, thanks very much for that.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian. Nobody else got any questions? Can I ask members happy as per the recommendation to confirm that the report provides assurance that strategic risks have been effectively managed with risk management framework across the council? We all agree? Thank you. Item 14. Sorry. Item 14 is the internal audit progress report. And I think Paul Monaghan, you had taken this.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Paul? Yes, I'm Paul Monaghan, Audit Manager for Durham County Council. This is the Q1 progress report for 2020-21. Table in paragraph 8 shows the progress made against the 6-month plan, with the detail of this in Appendix 2. And all the final reports that were issued in the period are shown in Appendix 3. Any changes that were made to the planning period, they're listed in the table in paragraph 12. Then the survey response rate, that's shown in paragraph 15. The response rate was 47% with an average score of 4.7 out of 5. However, the situation with the low return rate, that can be explained by the situation with the schools during this period. A summary of the status of the actions is included in paragraph 17. So there was 38 actions not implemented by their original target date. All of these have had revised dates set, and details of these 38 actions, they're shown in Appendix 6, which we pick up in Part B. Paragraph 20 shows that there was one limited assurance review. The detail of this is in Appendix 7, and again we'll pick this up in Part B. So finally, members are asked to note the 4 recommendations included in paragraph 4. Thanks, Chair.
Members got any questions that can't be picked up in Part B? Okay, thank you. Can I ask members to note the report as per the recommendations? Agreed? Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Chair.
Item 15 is the independent review of local authority financial reporting and audit. Can I ask Beverly to present the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in June of last year, Sir Tony Redmond was asked to undertake an independent review of the effectiveness of local audit and the transparency of local authority financial reporting. During his review, 160 responses were considered and 100 meetings were held with different stakeholders. This report provides members with information on the outcome of his review. So this morning I'd like to just highlight to members the main conclusions and recommendations taken from this report, which are most likely to impact on us at Durham. So there will be an additional requirement for officers to produce a new standardised statement of service information and costs to compare against the annual budget. So this will be presented alongside the annual accounts in a trial run from this current year end, and then with effect from the 2021-22 accounting year end, it will be subject to external audit. The purpose of this new statement is to allow the public and service users to better understand the accounts and improve transparency of what local authorities do. It's likely that the deadline for publishing the audited set of accounts will be extended from the 31st of July to the 30th of September, but the draft accounts look like they'll still have to be produced by the 31st of May. So this means that auditors are going to have 4 months instead of the current 2 to complete their audit reviews. The Audit Committee will retain responsibility for approving the final accounts, but there's going to be an additional requirement for the external auditors to present an annual audit report to the first full council meeting after the 30th of September. So that's a new requirement for us. All finance staff, auditors and Audit Committee members need to be appropriately qualified and trained to fulfil their role in the final accounts process. So we may see some training take place in the future, depending on what they class as appropriate. All finance staff, the report recommends that CIPFA and LASAC review local authority accounts to see if there's any way that they can simplify how the accounts are presented in the acknowledgement that at present they are too complicated. The review states that the current audit fee structure is too low. And quoting from the Redmond report, he says this does not enable auditors to fulfil their role in an entirely satisfactory way. And this is partly the reason why he says 40% of audits of the 18-19 accounts were not completed by the statutory deadline of the 31st of July. Obviously that doesn't apply to us, but across the board 40% of audits weren't completed on time. So from that there's an indication that generally across the board external audit fees may increase by around 25%. So Redmond proposes the creation of a new organisation called the Office of Local Audit and Regulation, which he hopes to manage, oversee and regulate local audit, and that changes to primary legislation will be essential to fully achieve its vision. So apart from the requirement to prepare the new standardised statement of service information and costs from this financial year end, any of the implementation dates of the other changes proposed are not known by us at this stage. So we'll have to keep members informed as we learn of any further developments resulting from this review, and we'll prepare what we can in terms of the new requirement for this year end when we look at the final accounts timetable. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Beverly. It seems a bit of an enigma in itself in the report, doesn't it? You know, nobody seems to know when, how, or whenever. Have any members got any questions or points that they want to bring up with Beverly at this moment in time? Okay, can we just note the report as per the recommendations? James, you got something you want to say?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. James Ronson, Vice Chair of Audit. There's a lot in this report that doesn't really apply to Durham. You know, we're not one of the 40% that didn't get their audits in on time, and you know, the recommendations we already have in place now. We have our two independent members who regularly give a lot of input, so I think this audit committee is doing quite well. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thanks for that, James. I think you're a fine vice chair. Yeah, I think it's a case of they keep changing the goalposts, don't they? You know, that's what happens, or it seems to happen. But yeah, thanks very much, James, for the observations.
Yeah,
so
as well, Eddie, that the fact that they're going to put 25% on the price, it's good for Mark, but you know, we spend our time reducing you know, getting a better value for money, and now recommending that we put it up 25%.
Well, that's the way it goes. Ian, did you want to come back? Ian Rudd?
Right, I'll take myself off mute. That might help.
Right.
Just a question for Beverly. Does she envisage that this recommendation or proposal will have any effect on the internal audit function at the council, or is it purely on the external audit function?
Thank you. The recommendation is that external audit work more closely with internal audit and perhaps take some more reassurance from internal audit than they currently do now. And I'm not saying that this is what Mazars don't do right now for us at Durham, but this is generally across the board. They're encouraging the two teams to work together more.
Oh, so it's likely that they'll place more reliance on the internal audit activity in future, perhaps?
Yeah. That's how I'm understanding it at the moment.
And just a subsidiary question, does the internal audit function get involved in the year-end checking of the accounts and balances at the moment, or is that purely the external audit function?
That I might ask one of the internal audit managers to come in there, but internal audit get involved in a lot of the things that external audit do at year end, the likes of the bank reconciliations and cash checking and things like that. So there might be some duplication of work that possibly could be avoided in future, but I'll ask one of the audit managers possibly to come in on that one.
Stephen Carter.
Yes, Stephen Carter, an interim Chief Internal Auditor and Corporate Fraud Manager. I think in response to that question, I would say that our work, very much we do the internal control work throughout the year, more focused around, the core financial systems, and that will be where our work, potentially the external auditors could link into and do link into. In terms of, as Beverly's mentioned as well, we do look at things like journals and adjustments that are made, but we don't predominantly look at those big figures that are included within the accounts themselves.
Are you all right with that, Ian?
Yeah. All right. Yes, I was just interested as to what the relationship was at the moment and how it might change in future. But I think that's answered the question. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Stephen, our new interim head of internal audit. Thanks. Are we minded to accept that note from Beverly? All agree? Thank you. I've got no other such business for the chairman of this meeting to be considered urgent in this part of the meeting. So I will move on to item 17, which is exclusion of the public. And at this point, can we agree the resolution to move into part B? Can we have a mover and a seconder?
Move it, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Second that, Chair.
Thank you. I think we've just got to now wait a little bit of time while our IT experts give us the go-ahead.